Welcome to Book Backstory. My name is Carla Brandenburg, and I'm an award-winning author of romantic suspense and paranormal novels. This podcast is a walk along my journey. I plan to interview some of my favorite authors, share with you some of the things that get me excited to write a book, and the stumbling blocks during the process. Today we're going to talk about how you develop a plot. One of the most basic fundamentals in writing is plotting, but what exactly is a plot? When I first started writing, going into the way back machine here, I wrote to record the movies that were playing in my head. People I didn't know doing things I'd orchestrated, but to what purpose? Once upon a time, probably my first feeble attempt at writing a novel, I wrote a romance about a baseball player and a tennis player. But there was no plot, per se. Of course, none of the agents I solicited told me that. They told me about too many commas, or not enough commas, or other fairly worthless reasons to reject it. Even when I finally started writing for real, I was kind of all over the place. I finally had a plot, a quest for the Holy Grail, but in the beginning, the writing wasn't focused. I took supplemental classes, did more research on how to write a good book, and was reminded about theme. Another important fundamental. Now we're talking high school English classes. How quickly we forget. The theme is what moves the story forward toward the plot in a single direction. What is this story about? A person, a place, a thing? It's easy to get carried away on the tangents, and you can travel some of those roads as long as they take you back where you were headed. And we aren't talking about chapters of tangents. We're talking about brief touches. Let's get back to my example. The theme is the Holy Grail. Every chapter has to advance that quest, even the ones that go touring around Pompeii and Capri. Trust me when I tell you I found a million tangents that I wanted to follow, that I found really interesting. But the question I had to ask myself was whether they distracted from the main focus of the story, or how I could tie them in. Many of them were a story unto themselves. Once I reined in my curiosity on all the peripheral ideas, tighten my focus, I had to get back to plot. This brings me back to the concept of GMC, goals, motivation, and conflict. A plot is what moves a story forward. What does this story accomplish? For that, you generally need to know the end of the story, or at least have an idea where you want to take it. Let's look at The Wizard of Oz. The plot is getting Dorothy back home. The end goal of the story. In order for that to happen, she has to leave home, and she does it in spectacular fashion, riding out a cyclone. Conflict. Now she has motivation to find her way back. Every chapter of the way is a step toward home. Everything she does moves the story forward that direction. A story without conflict is boring. What stands in the way of achieving the goal? Dorothy encounters several additional characters on the way. The Wicked Witch who is out to get her. The wizard's balloon that leaves without her. Now I'll never get home. Let's take a deeper dive. I've mentioned before that there are plotters and there are pantsers. Plotters need to know every step of their writing journey while allowing for an unexpected turn of events, but generally knowing the way forward. Pantsers know where they're going, but have no idea how they're going to get there, or at least not a solid plan. For pantsers, it's generally a case of throwing obstacles in the way with every chapter, and then working the way through those obstacles as they press forward. A journey of discovery. For plotters, they map that all out ahead of time. This is what's known as story structure, and whether you're a plotter or a pantser, your story needs structure. A story should start out with the setup. In The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy is out wandering and dreaming of the world beyond Kansas. As luck would have it, she happens upon a shady magician, which shows Dorothy's concern for her family. In spite of Dorothy's yearning to explore the world, the magician reminds her that Auntie Em would miss her if she left, and Dorothy hurries back home to Auntie Em's so she doesn't worry. We have empathy for Dorothy. But what's this? Bad weather? Before Dorothy can reach the safety of the root cellar, she's catapulted off to Oz. We have her goal, to get home, and we have the obstacle, the cyclone. The goal remains, but Dorothy has to find a new way to get home. She isn't in Kansas anymore. This is what's considered Act 1, plotting the end goal, making the character sympathetic, and changing the stakes. Moving on to Act 2, Glinda tells her surely the Wizard of Oz can help her get home, sending Dorothy on her journey along the Yellow Brick Road. Dorothy has to dig deep into her fears to make the journey and encounters multiple stumbling blocks along the way. She makes friends who encourage her on her quest and deepen her personality. They show the kind of person she is, which alters her journey. They fall into several all is lost moments. The flying monkeys tearing apart the scarecrow, falling asleep in a field of poison poppies. How will they ever make it to the Emerald City? And yet, they overcome and persist, building character. When they finally make it to the Emerald City, the sham wizard sets them on a new mission to destroy the Wicked Witch, a quest which is sure to fail. Moving on to Act 3, our character has no choice but to move forward in order to achieve her own goal. In the face of adversity, she succeeds, all while showing us her empathy and resilience, and that she had it in her the whole time. She makes it home with a new appreciation for the people around her. As a romance writer, the stakes are a little different. The goal is generally to bring two people together. They need to meet in Act 1 with opposing goals, but the reader needs to see the upside if they join forces, and that's ultimately the plot, getting them to that point. When I wrote Living Canvas, I was inspired by a B&B, a bed and breakfast. The part of me you see in that novel is the part where Audrey, my main character, gets a sense of home. Let me read you the passage. "This is going to sound silly," she began, "but you know how they talk about haunted houses on those television shows? How they feel bad right from the start?" Greg laughed. "You're talking about that creepy show where everyone whispers all the time and the lighting is so dark you can't see what's going on?" "That's the one. Well, if it can be said about those dark haunted houses, I think it's safe to say Castle Valley has benevolent spirits that make it more welcoming. The place just makes you feel good, doesn't it?" How do you write a plot based on that feeling? That's the challenge as a pantser. The plot became owning the B&B. The conflict between the characters came from Greg trying to buy the place, but unable to do so because he didn't have relevant experience. Audrey is an event planner and is about to lose her job. That provides her with the relevant experience and motivation to give it a go. Except she never considered that as a career choice, and she's highly risk adverse. So jumping at the opportunity doesn't sound so rosy with a man she hardly knows, a man who has children, no less. He needs capital and someone to run the place, but what does he bring to the table? I was halfway through that story before I realized I didn't have a plot. I was happy to write about an inspiring B&B and a globe-trotting event planner until I realized the story wasn't interesting. It wasn't going anywhere. The theme was the B&B, but even pantsers need a plot. This is where I remind you that good authors are also rabid readers. I like to think I have an affinity to plotting, but it wasn't always that way. Much of it comes from understanding how writers manipulate you when you read. Because of all the reading I did growing up and still do, I've been able to dissect a plot before most people realize there is one. One of my favorite stories is that while I was dating my husband, we were watching Miami Vice on television, one of his favorite shows. As the show unfolded, I pointed to one guy and said, "Oh, he's going to die." Dear husband turned to me in shock. "No way," he says. "He's one of the main characters on the show." Which I didn't know. I hadn't watched it much prior to that point. I shrugged my shoulders. Maybe I was wrong, except I wasn't. By the end of the show, he was dead. Foreshadowing. Plot development. It sneaks into your subconscious in ways you don't even realize. As an author, I'd grown to recognize the clues. Even when I get lost while writing, the ones where the plot isn't immediately evident, I know what needs to happen, and getting the story on course is just a matter of picking out the plot points I've unwittingly laid for myself and bringing them to the forefront. More often than not, the bones are already there and the skeleton just needs to be properly assembled. In summary, the plot is what story you want to tell. There's no place like home. The ultimate goal your characters are working toward. In Living Canvas, it was joint ownership of a B&B. Every chapter should be a mile marker along the way, counting down to the destination, foreshadowing what lies ahead like a billboard, a way to advance the story in spite of the flat tires you might experience or the wrong exits you take, overcoming adversity along the way to show what your characters are made of. Indiana Jones overcoming snakes and avoiding bad dates, plot points that propel him toward his ultimate goal. You get the picture. With all that being said, I don't always get it right the first time, and I have an editor who points out to me where my structure falters. Sometimes it's a matter of moving the pieces around, like fitting together a tangram puzzle. For those of you struggling with what goes in which act of the story, I've included a link in the summary section of this podcast to another author's website. She provides worksheets and additional resources on plotting. Thanks for tuning in today. Until next time.